Hi everyone, thank you for staying around for the last presentation. Firstly, I would just like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders both past and present. So as I was introduced, I'm Scott Sherwood. I'm the National Maintenance Manager for Phytogram, which essentially means that after we install projects, I'm the one that looks after them all across Australia. In being that I come from a horticultural background rather than a construction side of things, so if you have any questions on plants, I can cover those as much as possible. When it comes to the construction side of things, I will do my best, but if I can't, I'll come back to you on that. So who is Phytogram? So Phytogram has been running since 2002, and it's an industry leader and specialist in greening built structures and maintaining them. We are the largest supplier of green walls and roof gardens in Australia, and our most well-known project is the Victorian Desalination plant in Wonthaggi. This is the largest roof garden in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's approximately 27,000 square metres. Was installed in 2012, and we're still maintaining it to this day. Currently have about 45 staff nationally across multiple states, and we've been involved in some of the largest greening projects in Australia. So, why have gardens on built structure? So, as you all may be aware, our cities are facing a number of challenges as they continue to grow and spread. We're now having large populations living in highly condensed areas that is causing issues with our air quality and the environmental effects from the urban heat island. We're now seeing major losses of biodiversity within our cities and on the urban fringes. This is causing humans to lose connection with nature, which is leading to both health and well-being complications. I'm sure everyone's aware with the recent COVID lockdowns, the mental health effects that this has had being locked inside without any sort of access to nature. Whoops. I'll adjust. So people want cities that care for their environment and that can maintain its urban biosphere. Due to urban density areas, we are limited with the amount of space that we have to do this. So this is why we look to greening buildings. We try our best to maximise the usable space on a building, and from this we're trying to aim to make buildings as useful as they are on the outside as they are on the inside. By doing this, we can hopefully bring nature back into our cities and reconnect people with nature. So, firstly, by doing this, we use a concept called Biofuelic Design. So, is everyone aware of the concept of biophilia? So I can quickly run through. But essentially, it's an approach to architecture that seeks to connect building occupants more closely to nature and can create a more productive and healthy built environment. Strategic and mindful design that reconnects humans with nature does not only improve the habitability of spaces, it transforms them into rejuvenating, inspiring places that can support enhanced health, productivity, and learning for all. Biophilic design should be a core strategy for any designer or architect looking for future developments. So, green infrastructure improves the quality and livability of urban environments, increasing their adaptability and resilience to climate change. So we can look at three core principles: at financial, social, and environmental. So looking at the financial side of things, by having greening on your building, you can improve the property value and also create greater buyer interest. We're also looking to reduce the energy consumption of a building. Also looking at Green Star return, another factor as well is reduce worker sick leave in commercial buildings, and also creating a landmark that people want to visit a building. So you can look at One Central as an option. Even with the desal plant around there, we get lots of walking groups coming around there wanting to have a look. And also, greening isn't necessarily linked to new buildings. We can look at old buildings. So up on there is 38 Westbury Street. Is anyone aware of that building? No. So essentially, it was a 1950s St Kilda apartment block that the old roof was basically just a white roof, basically a glorified clothes drying area. The community there got involved and got about 200,000 worth of government grants and basically transformed that space into a living green space for creating a community environment for them to all interact with and also grow vegetables. Now, when we look at the environmental factors, where I think everyone's aware of reducing the heat island effect. So green roofs and green walls can lower that sort of heat buildup. I'm sure everyone's aware if you've ever walked against a concrete wall that's been in the sun, when you go there over night time, you can still feel that heat radiating off that. So we're trying to cool that down. So you can actually see in that picture there, having greenery on the building, you can see the temperature difference compared to not having any greenery on the building. So creating that natural sort of cooling effect. As mentioned as well, looking at energy consumption, trying to lower that down with insulation using sort of plant life and creating, lower air cool intakes. Also trying to delay stormwater runoff. With changing climates now, we're getting much more intense rain events. So by having water running straight off the buildings, that's when you can get localized flooding in areas. If you have plant life on a building, say with green roofs, you can actually slow that runoff and then slow the amount of water that's going into the stormwater. We're also trying to look at creating habitats for birds and insects, which also creates biodiversity, essentially bringing nature back into the city. As much trouble as they can cause on some of our plants, we really want to encourage that as much as possible. Reducing air temperature, as I said, around the building, and also improving air quality. Just by having plants around, we can remove VOCs, certain particulates in the atmosphere, which really can make a great beneficial to our cities. Now, when we look at the social aspects, we're trying to create areas for in public spaces, in work environments and at home that we can bring communities together. We'll also look at improving health and well-being and bringing nature back into our city. Now, I always like to look at a great example of what greenery, sort of really dialing it back rather than looking at giant buildings. So there's a great study that the Kansas State University did. So they had post-surgery patients that were randomly assigned to hospital rooms, some with plants and some without plants. The patients with plants actually found that they used less pain medication and actually recovered a lot quicker. When asked what the best thing about the room was, they actually nearly all said that it was the plants, and I need to get better at that. For the group without plants, they basically said the television was the best thing about the room. And although not part of the study, it seemed that potted plants had a better effect rather than cut flowers. And actually found that people were moving plants around the room, caring for them, pruning and watering them. And it's just, I guess, a great aspect of just showing of having plants around. I'm sure everyone that works here at Coroma loves being around all these plants here and just having that more natural effect. So we can start getting into roof gardens. So not only does a roof garden only enhance the overall aesthetic, it also improves the building's environmental performance through thermal insulation and climate responsiveness. Now, there's two types of roof gardens, which is intensive and extensive. Intensive is basically a very large profile, and extensive is a small profile. I'll go into those a little bit more. Really, from my side, with maintenance, the biggest challenge is roof gardens, essentially, they're easy to put up on a building. It's really, how are you going to look after them? And that's the big thought process when coming to designing a roof garden, because when we put these projects on, we're hoping that they're going to last for 20, 30 years, and the project needs to be viable and easy to access to make sure that we can maintain it and that it's not going to be, unfeasible or it's going to cost too much, and that within 3 years we're paying too much money to look after it. So that's a really important point to think about the viability and the design of a project. So looking at intensive roof gardens, these are typically heavier than extensive gardens with a profile of 200 mil to 1500 mil that supports substantial vegetation, shrubs and trees. These can also are trafficable areas, people can hang out, they can move around, and you can also get sort of larger trees on them. So this is one of our projects, 720 Burke, which is in Melbourne. So this has 640 square metres of roof garden, so split across the building. It's 16 roof gardens on the west, north and east facing facades. So this was in 2014, so you can see how it was at that stage. We are still maintaining that project. And this is what it is now. The picture that's on the left was actually taken yesterday. Unfortunately, the weather in Melbourne was really crap, which is why it's quite sort of dark. But you can actually see the level 6 middle area with our sort of large trees there. They're getting up to like 6 to 8 metres now. Generally, that's the maximum growth that we want, and that's only on a profile of about 600 mil. When it comes to trees on buildings, it gets into a complex area because there's no real regulations how tall you can have a tree on. So we like to have larger trees, but also maintain them as much because we don't want giant branches flying off the side of the buildings. I've seen some ones in Queensland where they've got tuckaroos and stuff that's crazy sizes. So we like manageable sizes within reason. And then we still maintain it. You can actually see in that middle picture the giant metal bucket sort of hanging on the top left-hand corner. So we basically come down, prune the outside of the buildings, and then through the inside we access the roof gardens. I've been trapped many a time on that BMU off the side of the building, but we have switched to now a mixture of both BMU access and rope access for maintenance. Now, as I mentioned, trees on buildings. So general concepts is basically staking, which you can see over there, staking. Really what you want to do when it comes to trees on buildings is really looking at root anchors, basically tying the root ball down to the structure of the building. One, it removes the unsightly sort of stakes, but it's structured into the building. You've got a safe thing that it's not going to go flying off the side. And then as well with the trees, you are creating a bonsai effect. So really, depending on how deep your media is, that's going to really control the overall size of your tree. And when thinking about putting trees and giant plants on the buildings, you really need to think about the plant choice that you're doing. So I don't know if anyone knows A101 down in Melbourne. They decided to put phoenix palms on the side of the building. Phoenix palms have giant spikes on them. And basically, if they go flying off the building, it's going to really basically stab someone. So they've actually had to put mesh now all around those palms basically to stop that from happening. So again, that really just comes down to that prior planning and thought about what you want to put on a building. Anything's possible, but again, thinking about where we're going to be in 10, 20, and 30 years' time. Now, extensive roof gardens. So these are generally thin profile gardens, generally to a maximum of about 200 mil. Now, the thinnest profile we do is 140 millimeters that we get substantial sort of root growth on. So here is the just sort of weight profiles. It's probably not the best picture. If anyone is interested on that, we can send that to you, which I can grab your sort of details. So if you will have noticed with your questions, I think it's the first question, what is the thinnest profile and weight? So that is 140 millimeters and 139 kilos per square meter. I'll just wait for everyone to finish writing. Also, if anyone has any questions about the projects while I'm going, feel free to ask. I can answer as much as I can. So a good example, is anyone familiar with the toilets at North Bondi? Well, recommend going and checking it out. It's a lovely, lovely toilet. So this was installed in 2016. You can actually see the old black and white photo. So it was an old 1980s building that just had a giant shrub basically trying to hide it away, the toilet. So the renovation of this was done with Wallara Council and the City of Sydney. Basically, they wanted to totally change the building and creating an inviting space that was a mixture of toilets, pump station, and also a bus stop. And then we came in and did the roof garden. It's still there now, so you can go check it out. Probably not now in winter. I mean, you can check it out now, but go down to the beach in summer, much more nicer. This is us installing the project. So basically, the whole building was removed, and then a new building was designed by Sam Crawford Architects. And then we've waterproofed the roof. Then drainage cell is put down. We have a geofabric layer that comes in. We then have our media. We lay our irrigation line, compact it as much as possible. With roof gardens, I don't know how much familiar you are with medias. You really want to use as little organics as possible. Our goal is to use a mineral-based media so that it basically breaks down as slow as possible. When using organics on a roof or anything, it's going to break down quickly, and that can also cause issues with drainage. As well, when you're dealing on the side of a building, everything's easy once you've got cranes and scaffolding up. 2 years down the line, if you're having to haul up soil and put it on a roof garden, it's just going to be super expensive to do that. Now, this is a toilet upgrade that's in Beer Park. So while we look at Bondi as a totally new building with roof garden, this is a rejuvenation project. So it's the original building that had a roof garden sort of put on top. So as part of the landscape regeneration, the City of Sydney required that the amenities block be set against be beautified. The aim was to make the building more sympathetic to the local landscape. So this is a 46 square metre roof garden that's on a profile of about 140 mil there. Now this is a roof garden, so this is more in a private aspect. So this was a renovation to the property. So we had the existing property at the back and then a new garage that was put on. So this was installed in September 2016 over 30 square metres and 190 mil depth. So we look after this at the moment about 3 times a year. We just go in and help the resident there, Mariana, and basically really just trying to keep the other 2 species from sort of taking over. But it's still doing really great. And Jimmy at the back there still looks after it. So if you have any questions. This one is Balaclava down in Vic, so a 34 square metre roof garden. I believe it's on 190 mil. So the idea here was to create an open space. Basically, that's their bedroom that they could then look out onto and then also move out to. We look after this. Again, we come in 3 times a year, and then we have some access points that we can attach so that we're in fall restraint and so we don't go off the side. Now, as well, we can do traffic. Generally, when you think of extensive gardens, you think of something that can't be used as a massive area for people to do. This was the Wharf Club. So this is a 230 mil profile that we installed using kaiku grass. It's a certain cultivar of it. But basically using the Wharf Club there, that rather than just having a roof that couldn't be used, this is a usable space that people from the local apartments can come out and hang out on. And as you can see, it creates a lovely space there. And it's on a pitch of, I think, of 8 degrees. Now, this is the Kangam Batman TAFE in Docklands. So this one's, I guess, a good example of where biodiversity can bite us in the bum. Essentially, it was installed in 2012, and being in Docklands, there's lots of bird life around there. Unfortunately, created too much, and basically the birds started taking over the area. So if you actually go and look down there, it's actually some giant netting around there just to keep the birds off it. So again, sometimes great intentions can sort of come back a little bit, but as much as we can try and plan, that's something that just happens. Now this is an extensive roof garden in Sydney. So this is our Paramount Recreation Club. So the concept of this roof garden was trying to look at a Californian style, but also with the changing climate within Sydney, becoming drier, becoming hotter, how we can use cacti and succulents. So Eric, our in-house botanist, basically came up with a design here for the client brief. So normally we wouldn't go with this style, but it was something different and is still performing well. So if you want to go to the gym there, you can check it out. Now, when it comes to roof gardens, we don't necessarily, which you saw with the Wharf Club, it doesn't have to be a flat space. Our media will stay stable up to 15 degrees, but using geo-webbing, you can get greater slopes. So everyone knows the grounds of Alexandria. If you go walk around there, you can actually see the roof gardens that are still there. So they were installed in August 2014, and they're on a 30-degree pitch. So by using that geo-webbing, you have the ability for multiple pitches, and I'll show you a couple of other, actually the next site, which is where we've got 48 degrees. So this is Pridum Hall. So this was done for Uni of South Australia. So this is 4 roof gardens around the building that is set at pitches of 42, 32, 18, and I'm not too sure what the other one is. Maintenance, thankfully, was really thought about here when thinking about pitches. So essentially there's raptor rails that run along the top and gates. Whenever thinking about roof gardens, if you have balustrades, please put gates in. To be surprised how many projects you have to hop over balustrading. But yeah, so this is probably, I guess, what we know as like the steepest roof garden in Australia, potentially the Southern Hemisphere, but is holding stable. So that has been in nearly, when was it, 2017. So I actually go over to Adelaide sort of twice a year, just with the local team there, just to look at it, and we visit that monthly, just trying to keep control of weeds, and rodents really love going onto the drip line there. So something that we've had to deal with capture with that. Now we have the Victorian Desalination plant. So this is coming up to nearly 9 years old now. So it's 27,000 square metres. So The original design scope was this, to use the surrounding environment and the local indigenous species within a 40-kilometre radius. And then the profile of this is on 160 mil. And so we've got some Lomandra longifolias that are upwards of about a metre there. We do monthly maintenance on this, and it's a fully reticulation system. So you'll see there's a dam there at the basin. That basically, all the water that's on the roof goes back into the dam, and then we pump that back up onto the roof to feed it. One of the issues that we have there is that dam is about 5 times too small. We really wish it had been a lot larger. When the design phase was in there, the government basically deemed that it was a drowning hazard, even though it still is a drowning hazard. So luckily, when the desal is running, we do have that to sort of top it up. Otherwise, we need to use mains to top up, but we sort of play around with that as much as possible. Summer makes it a little bit harder. We do water it every day, but in winter, we get away with once a week. So this also has some pitches on it. So this has a 20-degree pitch, which at the time was our first time using sort of geo-webbing, which is still holding strong. You can see the Carpa brodus and everything is, it's actually everything's performing well. We found though from the original 18 species, we're probably down to about 8 to 10 species now, just with that slow sort of degradation. We do try and add in other species. Again, part of that with design is really sort of using as many species as possible so that if we do have a failure, we're not left with a total death across the garden. Now, vertical gardens. So this is generally what everyone sort of loves to see across. So really, when thinking about designing, which is I think one of our questions, number 2, which is thinking about how you can design a vertical garden. So whenever someone comes up to us wanting a vertical garden, our answer is always yes. But really it comes down to a certain amount of questions. Really what the growing environment is, whether it's indoor, whether it's outdoor, north, south facing. A big factor as well, is a building going to go up in 2 years? Is that going to change the aspect? Because again, we're hoping with these vertical gardens that they're going to be there for at least 20 to 30 years. We want to know, can we get water up to the vertical garden? Can we get water out of there? You can do pump systems, but really if you can remove that water and reticulate, that's a great thing to do, but really just making sure we can get it in and out of there. Also looking at your host wall, what's your load bearing, and also waterproofing. And as well, coming from my side, the big thing, what is your budget? A lot with builders, they want to chuck up a green wall, but what is your maintenance cost going to be year on year? How is that going to sort of play out? Especially when thinking about residential sides, you know, builders will put up apartment blocks, but whether you've got 30 or 100 apartment blocks, how are you going to be able to afford that? So an example of this is actually the block. So if you watch in 2012, we did that vertical garden installation. It's now dead, unfortunately, but that's where you look at it was $30,000 maintenance a year. And that's because it was only 5 apartments on the 4 sides. You had electrical permits to get, you had to get an 80-foot boom, and it's just not really a viable sort of project. They decided to discontinue maintenance, and then when one of the drip trays basically had filled up with plant matter, someone decided that they would turn the water off to stop the leaking. So when thinking about projects, designing them into a building, you really need to think about those long-term costs of maintenance and how you're going to do it. And that initial outlay at the start, thinking about your access options, can really save you money in the long term. You can change, if that had properly been thought about, what would have been $30,000 a year could have been brought down to 10 or less. And when you've only got 5 apartments, each paying $6,000 a year, it's, you know, as much as I want to see plants on buildings, you know, that's not really going to help that sort of building. Looking at that, there are multiple different types. So there is a pot-based system, which works great. It's great for residential. It's great for where you can access it. Thinking it on a commercial aspect is probably not great in the long term, just because of the plant turnover. Essentially within a pot, that's your engine room. You know, a plant will eventually grow out of that, so you can have potentially 20 to 30% sort of turnover within a year. As well, you need to think about, does the system, because there are so many systems, does it work within the Australian environment? So there is the Patrick Blanc system that is around here. It works fantastically in the European environment, but doesn't work as great in Australia. So you can actually see it there. In Europe, it's great. Perennials, they die back down. But everyone's familiar. Does everyone know One Central Park in Sydney? So if you actually go by there now, of those vertical gardens, probably only about 20% is left alive. Again, you do have irrigation failures, but it just doesn't have that robustness to cope with a breakdown of irrigation. So as much as we want to see these projects succeed, sometimes thinking about what you're using within that environment. That also comes down to whether you're going to use organic or non-organic sort of medias. We try and stay away from organics as much as possible, only because they break down quick and they need replenishment. Plants don't need soil to live in. They basically just need a place to put their roots, have them protected, and have nutrients fed to them. So I say it's really depending on what you want to do, but if you're looking at commercial long-term, you want to stick away from organics as much as possible. This is some of our foam products that we used to use, but you can see the root grow through them. Unfortunately, they're a fire hazard now, so we don't use them as much as possible, but I'll go through some fire compliant systems. This is our foam-based system. So the City of Melbourne has an urban forestry fund. Basically, that means if you want to put any form of green infrastructure on a building, they'll basically pay half the price, or if you want to double it in size, they'll pay that extra money, and you can submit applications for it. They also have the Green Tool application. Hopefully, City of Sydney is actually starting to move along with that, and I can show you a photo of us installing this project. So this was about 2 weeks that we took to do this. So this is another perfect example of retrofitting an old building. So this building in Melbourne is about 100 years old. And when doing the initial engineering checks of the building, it was double brick, but we weren't too sure of the support structure of those bricks. So essentially we had to go core drill into it and brick tie the two bricks together, which basically took the 3/4 of the time, and then getting the plants up was the easy part. So Adam Bunny, who basically runs Loop, he doesn't own the building, he just runs a tenancy there, but wanted to add greenery. He's a real big proponent of it. If you go up to the roof, there's amazing tree yellows, there's plants all over it. And part of that design was, being only 40 square meters, we've actually got 80 different species within that garden. Just showing, I guess, the range of plants that you can use in a space that's on a north-facing wall that cops full sun, but at the same time cops Melbourne winter as well. Still going very well. We've had to change over a couple of species, but for the most part it's doing well. We just did a recent EWP on it, which was a visit. So basically we use a boom visit to get up there. We do that twice a year on this wall. With this wall, we've really tried to push our maintenance as far as possible. Generally, with walls that are up on the side of buildings, we like to visit 4 times a year, but with this building, we've tried to see, can we get away with 2, and looking at longevity of projects, can we bring maintenance costs down? Can we make it more viable to get more people on board? And that's part of what the City of Melbourne was trying to do. Yes? So that system, because of the amount of engineering, that was about $80,000. So City of Melbourne paid $40,000, and then Adam put in the other $40,000. And then maintenance costs for that, because I just renewed it, is about $9,100 a year. Yeah. Our costs now, when it comes to the firewall system, we got large growth on it, but with the changes within fire compliance, that's basically system has started to be phased out. We do more a felt-based system now. Anywhere that ranges from about $1,200 to $1,700 per square metre, which includes the first year's maintenance, depending on fire compliance. The higher 1,700 range is fire compliance. Also, it really depends on the size of your green wall. The larger it is, the cheaper per square metre it becomes. The smaller it is, like we do anything from 2 square metres up to 400, 600, the bigger it is, the cheaper that becomes. So this is the foam system as well. So this is two, what we call sort of firewall. So 200 square metres each. And we also use a BMU to come down and maintain that. We now have Tower 4. So this is our largest project vertical garden installation to date. So it's 463 square metres over 14 stories. So I think it's about 52 metres tall. It's now run on LED lights. Initially during the install phase, it's again, that whole design phase was over about 3 to 4 years, where we originally had metal halides, but now with the indoor lighting, we've moved to LEDs. That technology has really moved up there, and it's much cheaper to run, much more energy efficient. Also with this system, we're on a reticulated water system. So we basically capture all of the water for that roof, for the vertical garden at the bottom of level 6 and then repump it back in. And with that mains top up, which is about 500 litres, we estimate that it's probably only using about 1.1 litres of potable water per day to keep this alive. And it's actually amazing when you go into the office around there, when we do the maintenance on a weekend, people come in, they want cuttings. You can actually see all around the different levels of the office, Coke bottles, in cups, different cuttings, and just having plants around. People just want to be involved. They just love having that. That's some good pictures of it sort of all looking up. It's slightly changed. We've played around with some of the species. There's an open atrium at the top that lets light coming through, which has allowed us to, we went quite conservative with 30 species. We've probably got about 50 to 60 right now, and it's a really good wall for us to play around and see how far we can push plants in sort of low light conditions. We now have this in Queensland. This is Aria. This was 3 green walls. It is no longer Queensland's largest vertical garden. We just installed last month a larger vertical garden that I'll go through. That's 410 square metres. That's also fire compliant. ARIA has been a big sort of proponent for wanting greenery on their buildings. The major factor is the sellability of their apartments. They found that by starting to put greenery on their buildings sell 3 times faster than what they were before. And now every new project has some form of greenery, roof gardens, vertical gardens incorporated into their projects. These are just some Sydney projects around NAB Cafe, Star Casino. Again, we do large projects, smaller projects, just trying to incorporate some form of greenery into buildings. This is a recent one, Illumina. This is about 2 years old. Again, looking at sort of using general architecture around the building and how you can add greenery in there and creating a space for people to want to come and hang out within their building. Do you want me to leave that up for a bit? Again, these are recent projects, again, just looking at communal spaces, having that green wall around, making people want to be around plants and just be there feeling comfortable. Now, fire compliance. This is, I guess, the biggest change to green infrastructure over the last couple of years, because now with plants on buildings, they're considered fire hazards. So we've really had to look at how new ways can be developed. So with vertical gardens, we've changed our system to make it fire compliant. With the felt that we use, with low smoke ability, it doesn't basically set alight, and also using aluminium backing, trying to remove as many combustible parts as possible. And now, yes, that green wall, Manning Street. So I was actually up in Queensland putting that up over a couple of months. And yeah, it's now 410 square metres. So really looking forward to that one sort of settling in over the next couple of years, and then what we want to see over the next sort of 20 to 30 years. Again, here's some some more sort of projects. We've got Amex Lounge in Sydney, which unfortunately doesn't get used too much with the airport being locked up pretty much now, but we still try to get out there and see it. These are some other projects as well, looking at adding plant life to the front of building, trying to create that open, sort of happy feeling for people to come inside. Now, we've also started to move into creating a lightweight system for essentially a phytoarbor system, looking at how we can incorporate plants into the sort of structure of a building and also within a roof garden, but removing that weight loading. So we've developed this system to be suspended either within a wall or over the top. So you could essentially look at, you could suspend beams across that metal structure there to have hanging down. We've got the project in 60 Martin Place in the city. That's an outdoor open area that basically has all those cascading plants. So basically people sit under and they feel like they're in a jungle with all those plants cascading over. We also, again, with all that stuff, we don't have to be straight, we can be circular. We can look at using internal atriums within buildings that would normally be sort of bare staircases. So this is Harris Street down at sort of Piermont. So we've got 23 circular gardens that hang down. And when we irrigate this, it actually creates a rain garden feeling. So people have actually told us when they're in there, they're working in their offices, they hear the irrigation go off and it creates that rain effect. It's a very calming effect. Actually, people sort of come out of their office and stand around. And because of having all that plant life and that water, you actually get a circulation of cool air moving through the building, which is really nice when you go there. You can see, or you probably can't see 60, I'll show you. This is 60 Martin Place. So that's actually up on level 30 to full exposure to wind. So that's actually taken probably a year ago. So we've essentially got double the length of growth that's there. We've actually had to start cutting some of that foliage just because people were hitting their heads. And again, just trying to create that space out on a level 30 balcony of just having nature around them, being surrounded by that plant life. So this is my side of things, I guess, when it comes to maintenance, thinking about installing a project, how you're going to look after it, what those costs are. And that's really, bringing in a consultant, really, as early as you can be within that design stage to make sure that these processes or these systems are put in place to make the longevity of the project as much as possible. It's rope access has really sort of moved along. It's so much cheaper. You don't need permits. You don't need machinery. That's really where we're moving to. Because of that, we're actually training our staff up to be sort of ropes qualified to do that, which is making things, again, a lot more projects viable that would necessarily have been canned just because of the maintenance costs. So you can see this was our Warringa that we installed in 2016. So what we're finding as well now is when people think about horticultural plants, they think that it's just one contractor that can look after all the plants. So when installing greenery, you need to sort of, hopefully, we try and educate people as well that having a specialised person to look after or someone that's educated in green infrastructure, because when it isn't, as you can see, it looks fantastic there. This is what can happen. This was looked after by another contractor. Westfield decided that they just wanted to go with one contractor and decided that, again, they don't have that specialty knowledge to be able to look after it, which has resulted in this project going sideways. So, again, it's a hard one to push further down the line, but that's where it comes into that thinking about the maintenance longevity, because if people aren't willing to pay the money, as great thoughts that we have at the start, it can go bad. Now looking at green facades and planter boxes. So green facades differ from vertical gardens by using climbing and cascading species, by using netting. It's a much more cheaper option rather than putting a giant green wall up. It's also a cheaper maintenance option as well that requires less work. So we still reduce the building AC and energy costs. We still do the light and heat reflective. It's just a much more cost-effective way of doing it. But you get the same benefits. Now, an even greater option for this is actually to use pre-grown facades that you can install straight away. Now, the benefits of this is that you already have an established plant. You're not going to deal with transplant shock of basically uprooting a plant, damaging all its root system. If you can move that plant system straight in, it just makes that so much easier. You also get that established growth. So that critical first year of leader training has already happened, and so you can get that foliage cover much quicker. There's also less chance of disease and pest infestation, and it's also less susceptible to outside pollutants. So Medibank that you saw before, so this was done with sort of pre-grown planters that were established in, so we already had that growth that was there, so you can actually see that was it sort of during some initial install stages, and then that's, as you can see, how it is afterwards. This is another project here in Melbourne Park Apartments. So installed on a mesh, and then a mesh was installed afterwards, and then basically those plants grew across those two meshes, and then within about 9 months we already had 7 meters coverage across that wall. So you're looking within that first year, you can already get coverage across a whole wall. This is some more pre-grown planters that were installed. So this is Harold Park, I should say, just near the tram sheds there. This project was installed in January 2018, and that's pretty much how it was about a couple of months after install, just getting that growth in sort of peak summer. We also had Platinum Apartments. So the benefits of this is we use pre-grown planters that were grown on for about 9 months, and it was looking at a way to use the movement of, remove CO2 and carbon monoxide within the car park without using external ventilation, basically allowing movement of air through that car park and basically creating turbulent air with the plant life that allowed sort of movement. It was 203 planter boxes, and the planting palette consisted of 5 species with the aspect facing west and north. We've actually done testings after this, and so part of the design of this green facade as well is that we go in and cut certain holes into it that allows that air movement through. Now, we also do have planter boxes as well, using internal reservoirs, basically where we fill up. So another big sort of cost when you think about putting plants in is continual watering every week. So one of the benefits that we've sort of come up with now is actually creating a reservoir at the bottom of a planter that can then basically be filled up about once every 6 weeks that the plant can then wick on with water. The actual planter boxes over here at Coroma in the concrete, those are filled with, they're not actually attached to any irrigation. Everything else here is attached to irrigation, and we fill those up once every 6 weeks. Mimi, who works here, was trying to help us and was filling them up, and we found at Christmas they basically almost overflowed. So we just drained those out. I think it was just about a month ago they finally dried out, so they lasted about 5 months after that without needing any extra water. Again, just more going into planter boxes. It's just another alternative compared to giant green walls, or how you can add greenery in a building where you're not sort of having to worry about getting water in, irrigation, sort of plumbing, just different options that are available. So this is Coroma. So you can see from 2018 to 2020 now how much growth we've got. So much so we need to trim some of those trees because they're blocking out the light over there. This was actually designed under a low light. We're actually getting some of the plants here that are existing under 1,000 lux. Generally, when we talk about plant life, we're looking for a minimum 3,000 lux, which is just brightness of light. Lux is just how bright a light is. For example, in the middle of summer, outside is about 400,000 lux. In saying that, we found out that multi-stem Ficus benjamina basically start to fall over under low light. Essentially, they grow towards the light, but their stems just become really thin, and so they eventually get too heavy and sort of fall over. So we're going to actually fuse the stems of those over there, basically to create a stronger stem. So we now know, I guess with a lot of our stuff, we learn how to do things wrong before we learn how to do it right. So working in low light conditions, even when we know those plants can survive, we're definitely not going to go multi-stem. This is some more internal, it's up in Queensland. On the left, that's QUT University. So again, using plant life within a study area. It's actually a great space to go in there, all the students around there, and it's just a nice, calming environment. We've also got, next to that is Terrariums. That's at Angel Place in Sydney. Again, big communal space where everyone comes down from the office, hangs around. There's a cafe there. No light coming in there. It's all basically artificial light around there, but just having those plants around, it creates a totally sort of different space. I'm sure if you've been around like a food court with no plants, it just has that sterile environment. You go into this environment that normally would have been sterile is alive. Soils and slumpage. So I briefly sort of went over that about trying to work away from organics as much as possible when thinking on the built structure. So That picture on the left is basically when you're using a high organic mix. I don't know if you've ever had plants at home or pot plants where you go buy from Bunnings, you go buy some potting mix, you chuck it in, 6 months later, the pots drop down. So it's much easier at home to do that. When you're on the side of the building, that can create massive issues. We actually had a project that I went and looked at, 74 Eastern Road down in South Melbourne. And when we looked at the specifications, they'd actually put in a high quality potting mix. By doing that and having a small drainage hole in the planter, that potting mix started breaking down and basically plugged all those holes within the planters. We actually found as we started going around, the planters were overflowing because they couldn't get the water movement. So those initial where builders will come in on a project, basically you'll have a good podium mix that's selected, but they'll cut it out and they'll just use a cheap sort of potting mix. That sort of where they're trying to save maybe $35 a square metre can cost you upwards of $1,000 to $3,000 per square metre to rectify it. So this is where we want to try and educate people as much as possible about when putting plants and soils and on a building, you need to make sure you use the correct product. I don't care if you use our sort of podium mix, as long as you use a proper podium mix, you'll get that stable growth and you're not going to have plants like there. And the big thing for me pushing that is green infrastructure is only within its infancy within Australia. It's been around for a number of years. We've been around for 20 years, but if someone puts greenery on a building and it fails, that's it. Greening on buildings doesn't work. It costs too much. It always fails. Compared to if you go buy a fridge or a shitty car and it breaks down, you're like, I've just bought a crappy car or I've bought a fridge, you'll buy another one. So it's really just trying to make sure that people make those right choices at the start and also chatting with builders and trying to educate them as much as possible. We've started working now with floating gardens. So this is, I guess, more outside, building on sort of structures, but looking at how we can rejuvenate sort of landscapes, again, with minimal maintenance, and also basically having plants do the job. So looking at sort of areas where we've got ponds and dams and we want to revegetate that area by putting in some floating gardens and have those plants basically naturally vegetate that surrounding area by having that seed growth around. Also looking at trying to remove pollutants from water. So definitely around sort of farming area where you've got excess nutrients within the water. Even around minings, we're trying to play around where there's heavy metals within water, how we can use plant life to actually naturally purify that water and change it. So these floating gardens that we have here, this is down at the desal plant. So within the dam that we had there, we actually started getting a buildup of azolla, which is a weed, and phosphorus buildup. We actually started putting the floating gardens in, and it's basically controlled that weed growth, controlled that algae blooms, because the plants are naturally breathing, they're adding oxygen within that air, and also naturally vegetating the area around. Research and development. So again, we are just trying to find different ways that we can add plants onto buildings, because it's expensive. As much as we want to say we're doing as much as we can, it's still a luxury item at the moment. We're trying to change as much as possible. How can we make it cheaper? How can we make maintenance cheaper? How far can we sort of push it, within sort of reason? So that's our biggest thing that we're sort of trying to do, and trying to make stuff pretty at the same time. That's it, unless everyone... I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Yes.
Just a quick question here.
Yeah.
It might be too detailed, but I was just curious how you anchored the root balls down to the structure.
Within the... Yeah, basically just drilled into the concrete. So generally you'll have a mesh, and like a wire mesh that'll go around the root ball. So if you pre-grow the tree depending on the root size, and then you basically get a mesh. So it's a specialized anchor system, and then you'll have a 3-point that you sort of drill into the ground, and that you can then re-waterproof around.
Kind of anchors with cable.
Yeah, that holds it down.
Yeah.
So this is where it comes into that pre-planning, because again, you can have your sort of structure and go, all right, we're going to put some trees on, but if you've already waterproofed already, then it makes it a little bit harder. You can redo it, but if you plan beforehand, it's a much simpler system.
Yeah, cool, thank you. One little question still. Yeah. What are some of the most common kind of failures of this, of say, green roofs? Is it the blockage of drains? Or is it something else?
So it comes down to, are you using the correct products? So again, are you using the correct media? It comes down to as well, like cost, being able to get up on the side of a building. So if you've got correct static lines and anchor points, it's much easier. But as I was saying, sometimes we've had gardens put in, no one's really thought about how it's going to look after, and then there's no gates to get out there. We've even got a project at the moment, Parramatta Square, Walker, buildings up there. So static lines were meant to be installed during construction. The builder decided that they weren't going to pay for that, and then they've tried to retrofit a facade system, basically a Raptor rail on inside further on the windows. But with a Raptor rail that runs around, you basically just go straight down with a rope. You can't use it on an angle. So now for a level 6 garden, that if they had to put a static line in, would have been easy, would have been an hour to do. We now have to abseil from level 16 down to level 6. Hook off, is going to take 3 guys a day to do, and you've gone from something that costs, $200 or $300 to now is, $2,000 or $3,000. And again, that's when people just go, well, why are we paying all that money if it's going to cost? And it's, again, those simple decisions that are made that people don't understand during that design phase. Oh, no, we don't need that. We can retrofit something, can have dire consequences.
Yeah, thanks.
No worries.
Yeah, one question at the back, is it? Yep.
Terraces without the concrete roof, just what do you call this, iron roofs on those heritage terraces?
It depends on your weight loading on for the building. You may need to do some re-engineering for that. We are doing that with some older buildings, basically if they're renovating their building, adding some extra structure in there. I said if you're looking at the thinnest profile, you're looking at 139 kilos per square metre. You can look at different options, which is, again, we have our arbor system, which is trying to create lightweight plant systems on roof where you're not having to use a different sort of system. And there you're only looking at about maybe 40 kilos per square metre. So depends on your building. If you can find out what your weight loading is, then anything's possible from there. Pretty good. Like it's changing. So I think James was actually telling me this today. Within 2050, I think the City of Sydney is trying to increase greenery within it by about 8%. So they're forward thinking in that. I think they're saying, though, our population growth is going to grow by about 17%. So our population growth is sort of outstripping our greenery. So I think at the moment everyone's trying to push it as much as possible.
Any last questions at all? Okay, just over to the maybe questionnaire.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe help with a few of the answers if anyone's having any problems?
Is there any questions that they don't know there? List 5 benefits of having gardens. So you can improve the air quality by having thriving plants, reducing CO2 and VOC levels around. You can also improve the insulation of your building by keeping warm air inside. Sorry? The list 5 benefits, or is that a different one? Oh, I might have the wrong answer.
List 4 steps, yeah.
List 4 steps that Phytogram uses by ecological. No, well, it's basically proper planning, thinking about like the environment that we're going to install a project in.
What was the question for?
4 steps. What else do I want to say? Yeah, 4 steps, yeah. We come into the design, using using correct species for the environment. Yeah, thinking about your budget for your project and your overall maintenance costs. So choosing, the correct system for the longevity of the project and what people's budget is.
So are you involved with substructure?
Substructure.
Yeah, let's say I'm in a complex where there are townhouses. We had beautiful gardens.
Yeah.
But the roots have killed the membrane and the concrete slab.
Yeah.
We had to remove the whole lot. There's nothing there anymore. It's horrible.
Yeah.
Plus hundreds of thousands of damage
Yeah.
to the slab. So how do you prepare the concrete base for to be
So it's using...
so it doesn't end up like this after 10 years.
So look, that comes down to using a correct sort of membrane, using leak systems so you can contain... I don't think any system is foolproof over the longevity, but look, we've seen some bad membranes. So there was a project, Roden Street, down in Melbourne, where the membrane that they'd used was something, it's from Bunnings. Like we based it, I think of it like a bathroom. And then they basically used a cheap sort of membrane and the root systems actually started penetrating and it all had to be sort of ripped down. So making sure that, I think with waterproofers now, they'll guarantee with a 2 mil membrane, 20 years, I think 3 mil membrane up to 30 years. So I guess this comes down to the hard point, because architects can specify something, but once the builder comes involved, that's when things can change. And I think that's a larger talk about regulations with green infrastructure, which isn't there at the moment, and people can get away with murder because they get that 12 months defects, or they get to that 7 year and then they get away with it. So it's really trying to make sure that we hold builders to account that they're using those correct sort of products for that, for what you're intending.
Yeah. Another thing is number one.
Number one, that's 140 mils is the thinnest profile and 139 kilos per square metre. 39 kilos per square metre.
Number 5.
So that was... Yeah. So that's thinking about the environment that the project is in. So is it indoors, is it outdoors, northwest facing? Thinking about the budget, so not only for your installation, but maintenance. So if you're putting it into an apartment block, are they going to be happy with 10 grand or 20 grand or 5 grand? So that'll determine whether you can use a green facade, whether you use planter boxes. Choosing the correct species, choosing the right plants for the area.
Beautiful rooftop. We have olive trees, mint, rosemary, all for nice cocktails.
Yeah.
And, lamb.
So are you looking to put anything back there, or is it just going to stay?
Olive trees, mint, rosemary, lime trees, and chilies.
Oh, lovely.
So when I cook, I go upstairs.
One last question. We need to wrap because these people have been seriously stayers in the game. You've survived. We've got 5 minutes left. So any last questions?
We do to a certain point. So within our sort of podium mixes, we're using low organics. So when it comes to edibles, it's about thinking what you do. So you want to think more like of your woody herbs. So rosemary, thyme, rather than sticking away from fleshy stuff. You can think about, say, with a roof garden, looking at adding planter boxes that you have the organics there that you can replenish quickly. So thinking about how you sort of split that garden up. You can do sort of fruit trees. We've actually, if any of you have gone to the toilet up here, there's a lemon tree up the top. Yeah. Limes as well. So, yeah. Again, it's trying to create that root volume as well. So, if you're wanting to grow potatoes or beetroot and everything, you're going to want something a little bit deeper with those organics. So that's where having, say, a thin profile roof garden, but then, say, certain areas with a raised planter box where there's only a small amount of increased weight capacity rather than trying to create something that's, 400 mil deep across a whole roof garden. That's why they put it up there. So interestingly, they got a special, I forget who got the lemon tree, but it was a specifically low light design one because it grows so slow. But when you get plants that grow really slow, that just means if they go backwards, it's really hard for them to recover. So that's actually just a general Eureka lemon tree that we put back up there. We wanted to see if we could make it work. So in doing that under the low light, essentially as it flowers, we remove the majority of the flowers but leave, say, 3 or 4 in the hope of trying to get some lemons. I think we've had a few lemons before.
We have. We've had lots of lemons before.
You'll have to answer
and there is a reason why we had a lemon tree in the bathroom, because the designers were Archer Studios from Melbourne, 3 brothers, and they're Aussie boys. And you know what? When the outside toilet was busy, you go on the lemon tree, right? So don't try it today. I wouldn't try it today if you don't mind. That's right.
Typically where there's veggie gardens in projects, there's
Yeah. Well, that's what they do at 38 Westbury. Yeah, because we only visit that about once every 2 years. The community, they just upkeep it. We basically just come down every now for if there's any irrigation problems or just harder cutbacks. The majority of it, they look after it themselves. Again, that's in planning in a project. If you can get more people involved in it and people that want to be, it makes it so much cheaper. Sorry? You can give them to me or you can hold on to them.
Okay, if you can hand your forms in once completed, we'll ensure that Scott and James have them and they can facilitate your points for you. Having said that, we are wrapping for the day. Thank you so much, Scott. Was that informative? But Scott, and these are our lovely boys. We love having Scott and James in the house, in the Karoma Temple, because they've done this for us. But they're speaking tomorrow again about...
Just vertical gardens, DIY at home.
DIY home gardens. What time's that?
1 p.m.
1 p.m. So if you'd like to hear more from a personal perspective, we'd love to have you back. James is also here. Any questions for them afterwards? Thank you so much. That was wonderful. We love the boys in the house. It's good eye candy as well. So, guys, thank you so much. You did awesome today. Stayers, played strong, did good. Please drive safe. Remember to come and join us back on Saturday and Sunday. All the staff are here if there's any other final questions. And we did it. We got through a full day of 7 points. So bravo you. Give yourself a hand. Well done.